Hello everyone, and welcome to another Elemental Shaman video in Dragonflight. My name is Brock Shaman. Today we're going to be doing the much requested lightning build guide for patch 10.07. I'm also going to be releasing a guide for the Elemental Shaman in 10.1 once all the changes and tier sets and things come out, so stay tuned for that coming in the next few weeks. If you guys like the content that I'm doing, consider supporting my content by liking the video, subscribe for more Shaman content going into the future. And if you want to support what I'm doing, you can head over to my Patreon page and my Twitch live stream. I'll leave the links to those things in the description down below, along with the build talents for this guide. So speaking of talents, let's go over what the build is all about. So clearly, my last two videos, we talked about the Icy Hot guide, we talked about the Wildfire build. Now we're talking complete lightning build. Key capstones for this build, there are two variations for it, and I'll go over what those variations are. The more popular one right now is the left side plus mountains will fall. This is much more popular in the Korean, Chinese, and Taiwanese servers, but it is starting to make its way over to the NA and E side. You can choose to, instead of go with Elemental Blast, if you don't like that, you can pick up Flash of Lightning instead. If you tend to not like the whole playstyle of Elemental Blast plus the cast time of it. But key Shaman points you want to pick up on the class tree. Nature Swiftness kind of makes Elemental Blast a lot easier to play with, so I'd definitely be picking that up, along with Totemic Recall and Totemic Call of the Elements, because Liquid Magma Totem is still really strong with the lightning build. Its overall value in dungeons compared to Primal Elementalist and the AoE effect that you get from your Primal Storm Elemental, it's just better overall, so we tend to run that. And because we run Liquid Magma Totem, we want to also use Totemic Recall and Call of the Elements. Now, if you just completely decide to not run it at all, like the Liquid Magma Totem build, you can come back into Primal Elementalist, take out Call of the Elements, maybe pick up Healing Stream Totem or Chain Heal and Earth Shield for some more sustain. That's completely up to you guys. But generally speaking, Liquid Magma Totem is the way to go. And we, of course, are playing Ice Fury and Electrified Shocks and Echoes of Great Sundering and Lightning Rod. This is pretty much what makes up the lightning build. Now, with the Mountains Will Fall variation of this lightning build, Power of the Maelstrom tends to not have a whole lot of value in this build, but it is required in order to get into Echo Chamber and Mountains Will Fall. Pretty much, we'll talk about this later, but it's a negligible increase for this build all around. The other variation of this build, you could choose to go into Skybreaker's Fiery Demise. That's another way of kind of looking at this. With Skybreaker's Fiery Demise, you could choose to have 1 point out of Power of the Maelstrom, go into Flash of Lightning instead, right? Still pick up Elemental Equilibrium, but generally speaking, you are still going to be running 1 point at least into Power of the Maelstrom, as it is required just to get down to the final categories down here. So in this video, we're going to be mainly talking about the Mountains Will Fall variation of it, but you could make an argument that we're talking about both because the actual playstyle and the rotation is pretty much the exact same. So now that we've talked about talents, let's go ahead and move over to the next section. All right, in this section, we're going to be talking about stat weights and general gear. So for the Elemental Shaman and the Lightning build, we actually want to kind of focus more on haste, mainly for your secondary stats, followed by crit. Pretty much ignore mastery altogether, but versatility tends to actually get a little better the higher keys you go, mainly because of the added damage reduction that you get from it, alongside double dipping into the damage increase. So versatility tends to be a little bit better once you get to the point of like 24s and above, just because we have such so many less defensive options as an Elemental Shaman compared to other classes or other male classes in general, like Hunters having an immunity, right? Having just more health than us, especially for Beast Mastery Hunters, and a lot of other casters just having so many more defensive options. We're only limited mainly to Earth Elemental, which gives us pretty much a Fortifying Shout, Astral Shift, or just sitting in Ghost Wolf for like 5 seconds. So the versatility definitely helps out with that the higher level keys you go. Mainly you want to focus on haste though. As myself, I have 27% haste I have 29% with the Howling Rune buff, which I tend to use. And then I'm actually simming right now for a little bit higher critical strike in both single target and AoE with this build. So keep an eye on your own simulations. If you want to learn how to sim your character, I have a video on that on my channel. I'll leave the link to that in the description down below. But generally speaking, you kind of want to have that haste over crit, then versatility, and ignore mastery. When it comes to the Onyx Annulet, we have a lot of questions on the channel about this as well. The Onyx Annulet, the best all-around combination of stones right now is the Desirous Bloodstone, Prophetic Twilight Stone, and Storm Infused Stone. The reason that this is because we're critting a lot more. So whenever you're critical striking an enemy, you have a chance to shock them and 2 nearby enemies, dealing 19,006 nature damage. I would only really recommend using the Onyx Annulet though in lower dense pack dungeons. Examples of that could be like Shadow Moon Burial Ground, Court of Stars, and Temple of Jade Serpent for Season 1. I haven't done a whole lot of testing for Season 2 yet, but I'm assuming dungeons like Vortex Pinnacle would be a good option for the Onyx Annulet, but we'll see what Season 2 brings for when it comes to the actual gearing of your character. If you are going to use the Onyx Annulet though, and you are doing high keys, I would recommend not replacing a heavy versatility or heavy haste ring with it. I myself am using the Thunderous Downburst ring, and I choose to replace my actual unstable arcane loop. Now it is a heavy haste, but I would be losing far more versatility than I'd like to lose if I'm running the unstable arcane loop plus Onyx Annulet instead. So I chose myself to not lose 4% versatility and just run the Thunderous Downburst ring combo with Onyx Annulet. I also don't use this ring as often because I would only use it obviously 3 out of the 8 dungeons. So that's the whole kind of spiel for the Onyx Annulet and your gear. If you guys have any questions about further itemizing your character, I recommend leaving, or even other questions, I recommend leaving the comments down below. So let's move on to the next section. All right, it's time to go over your single target spell priority. Now, your highest priority is going to be Storm Elemental pretty much on cooldown if you have no reason to hold it, as well as Liquid Magma Totem if you're running that talent. Keep in mind that the Call of the Elements ability is kind of like a net neutral damage increase, so it's really useful because it is on the GCD to actually use that Call of Elements ability while you're moving if you have to move. Then we want to keep Flame Shock on your target at all times. Refresh it if it has like 6 or less seconds on it. And Stormkeeper, you want to be using that if you have at least 124 Maelstrom, with the Swelling Maelstrom talent used, of course. Or you have an active Surge of Power buff while also having at least 46 Maelstrom. These two combinations will actually allow you or enable you to buff both of your Stormkeeper charges with Surge of Power if you are able to cast Lava Burst before your second Elemental Blast. So there's a bit of a burst window there that you want to be using Stormkeeper with. Then, obviously, the priority is Lightning Bolt if your Stormkeeper and Surge of Power buffs are active. Lightning Bolt if your Surge of Power buff is active. Frost Shock if the Ice Fury buff is active and Electrified Shocks is not currently on the target. Then you want to be casting Ice Fury. Then Lava Burst if you have at least 63 or more Maelstrom, and Master of the Elements buff is not on your character, like it's not active. Then you want to be using Elemental Blast if Master of the Elements buff is active, followed by just spamming Lightning Bolts. And if you need to move, you can refresh your Flame Shock or cast Frost Shocks. A side note for this, you actually don't want to play around your Power of the Maelstrom procs in 1 to 2 targets. Or in single target, you don't really need to worry about your Echoes of Great Sundering buffs as well. Your 2 target spell priority is very similar to the single target, but this is where we start to integrate your Earthquakes with the Echoes of Great Sundering buffs. So your Storm Elemental through Ice Fury priority list is the exact same, but after Ice Fury, we actually want to be looking at Lava Burst if you have at least 50 or more Maelstrom, and Echoes of the Great Sundering buff is active, but Master of the Elements is not. This is where we want to be using Earthquake with Echoes of Great Sundering and Master of the Elements buff active at the same time on 2 targets. Then we want to look at our Lava Burst. If you have at least 63 Maelstrom, like we did before, Echoes of Great Sundering and Master of the Elements buff are not active, and follow that up with an Elemental Blast if Master of the Elements buff is active, but Echoes of the Great Sundering is not. Obviously, you need to be using Elemental Blast in order to cast your Echoes of Great Sundering empowered Earthquake. Then, obviously, we want to be looking at Chain Lightning instead of Lightning Bolt like we would in single target. So on 2 targets, Chain Lightning. And if you have to move, either refresh Flame Shock or Frost Shock while moving. Your 3 target spell priority is relatively simple. Obviously, keep Storm Elemental on cooldown, use Liquid Magma Totem, and then use Stormkeeper on cooldown. We want to be Earthquaking if Echoes of the Great Sundering buff is active, and then Frost Shock if Ice Fury buff is active, but Electrified Shock's debuff on the targets are not. Then we want to look at Elemental Blast if Echoes of Great Sundering buff is not active, and then follow that with the Ice Fury priority. Then we pretty much just spam Chain Lightnings to get Maelstrom to use on Elemental Blasts and Earthquakes, and make sure that you're using either Frost Shock or Flame Shock while you're moving. On 4 to 5 targets spell priority, this is where the rotation just gets really simple. Keep Storm Elemental on cooldown, Liquid Magma Totem as well, and Stormkeeper. Earthquake if you have Echoes of Great Sundering buff active, Elemental Blast if you do not have Echoes of the Great Sundering buff active, and then Chain Lightning and use Flame Shock and Frost Shock while you need to move. Your 6 or more target spell priority is pretty similar to 4 and 5, but we start to integrate a little bit more of Surge of Power nuances. So you keep your Storm Elemental on cooldown, followed by Liquid Magma Totem as well. And you want to be using Stormkeeper if you have at least 50 or more Maelstrom and Echoes of Great Sundering buff is active, or 75 or more Maelstrom and Echoes of the Great Sundering buff is not active. Then you want to Earthquake if Echoes of Great Sundering buff is active, and Chain Lightning if Surge of Power buff is active as well. 6 or more targets, Surge of Power buffs Chain Lightning to chain on at least 6 targets, right? Instead of 5. So this is why we're using it here. Then we want to be using Elemental Blast if your Echoes of Great Sundering buff is not active, and spam Chain Lightning to build Maelstrom. Of course, use Flame Shock and Frost Shock if you have to move, but if you know that heavy movement on a fight or area is coming up, it may be worth to use Ice Fury to have stronger Frost Shocks and apply those Electrified Shocks debuffs. That's a little side note there for your multi-target or just in general movement time. All right, guys, so now we're going to be talking about Mythic Plus tips and kind of like some new nuances you want to be looking at, especially when it comes to the Lightning build in Mythic Plus and going into Season 2. First off, pooling your Maelstrom is so much more important in this build because of the interaction of Echoes of the Great Sundering, as well as when you use your spenders, you apply a Lightning Rod to your targets, right? So Lightning Rod is a significant portion of your AoE burst via Stormkeeper. So where possible, definitely try and apply some Lightning Rods to targets before you get into your Stormkeeper burst rotation. You're going to see this in, if you guys paid attention to my rotation in the mass AoE section of the video, I do apply some, or at least 1 Lightning Rod before I use Stormkeeper. So that is a very big significant damage increase to your AoE. And pooling Maelstrom from pack to pack, like I mentioned before, it's really good for Lightning Rod, but it's also good for Echoes of the Great Sundering specifically. You have the ability to actually pool enough Maelstrom to Elemental Blast to get Echoes of the Great Sundering, and then pool your Maelstrom again to get even more Maelstrom going into the next pack. So you could go into a pack with a fully empowered Earthquake and 150 Maelstrom. Well, technically not, because of the way that your Maelstrom actually goes down if you're not in combat. But Echoes of the Great Sundering has a 25-second duration for the buff. So you can apply the buff to your character and then pool enough Maelstrom to go into the next pack. And then when you're drop combat, you know, you have a few seconds to drop this empowered Earthquake. Start off with a fully empowered Earthquake, you know, apply a couple Lightning Rods, then go into your AoE burst rotation to see right away I have 3 Lightning Rods out. So that's a pretty significant burst potential, especially on 6+ targets, right? So keep that in mind. That's going to help you a lot in your overalls in the dungeons as far as your damage goes. Another tip would be to understand and recognize when you need to switch up your rotation based off of how many mobs you have up against you. So when you need to start integrating Ice Fury into your rotation again, or Lava Burst and Flame Shock management on your targets, right? This starts to happen at 4 or less targets. So as mobs start to die, if you did a really big pull, especially like on bolstering weeks, you know, the previous bolstering affix, you know, used to actually increase the health of mobs. So as mobs died, you had 1 or 2 left over that had a lot more health. This is a good example of when you should be changing up your rotation and your spell priority based off how many mobs are left. So we understand based off the spell priority that we talked about in the video that Ice Fury is used at 4 or less targets, right? Lava Burst is used on 2 or 1 or 2 targets. And then Elemental Blast and Earthquake is always used on 2 or more targets. So understand when you need to be swapping your rotation to do the most damage based off of how many targets you have in front of you. Also have an understanding of your Shaman toolkit and how your utility is useful in specific dungeons. For season 1, like we talk about this a lot in my videos, but specific talents have really good uses in specific dungeons. I've talked about Cleanse Spirit, obviously in Temple of Jade Serpent, right? Guardian's Cudgel in Court of Stars for the imps that will cast back to back, right? Purge for a lot of different dungeons like Loadout Offensive, right? Azure Vault, right? And Tremor Totem's even useful in Azure Vault for the elementals that cause the sleep effects. We talk about Stone Skin and Poison Cleansing Totem. Poison Cleansing Totem's good for Algathar's Academy. It's going to be good for Freehold and Brackenhide Hollow in next season, right? Stone Skin Totem's fantastic for Algathar's Academy to reduce tank damage on the tank buster effects from the Tree Boss and Croth, but also Halls of Valor, Horn of Valor from Himdall. I talk about this a lot. You can reduce the entire party's damage from that Horn of Valor, especially on Tyrannical weeks, by 10%. That's a big deal. Also, Fenrir does a lot of physical damage with the bleed effect and the AoE thrash effect. You can reduce that by 10%. So keep those things in mind when you should be using which abilities and what dungeons are going to require certain utilities. Going into season 2, Poison Cleansing Totem and Cleanse Spirit is going to be very, very useful, especially on afflicted weeks. The afflicted affix, you can pretty much negate it as a shaman very, very easily. You're going to be very useful coming in season 2. So make sure that you guys understand those things and change up your talents based off the dungeon. Another tip that I would talk to you guys about is actually understanding the ability mechanics in the dungeons. There's going to be certain bosses that require you to have defensives for certain abilities. I can give you examples like in Loadout Offensive, right? When you're fighting the third boss, you need to have a defensive for when the arrows go out, right? The arrows are called a specific the arrows are called Terra and Munich Gale Arrow, right? At 100 energy, Terra blast target players with a destructive force of wind, inflicting 50,000 nature damage. 4 tornadoes drift from the point of the impact. If you're an elemental shaman and you have another ranged in the group, you're probably going to have a range stack, and then the melee and the tank are going to have a melee stack, right? Gale Arrow, in really high keys, you have to have a defensive in this. And in some situations, you're going to need to sit in Ghost Wolf in order to have the Spirit Wolf buff stack up to 4 times to give you 20% damage reduction. Also, communicate with your tank. If you're playing with a prop paladin, you know, when is a good time for you to be sacked or use a Blessing of Sacrifice? If you're playing with a Resto Shaman, okay, am I going to need Earth Shield for its 6% damage reduction during this mechanic, right? You guys need to be communicating with your team to understand when you're rotating defensives and which class needs a certain external defensive when it comes to the abilities in the rotation of the boss fight, right? As you guys start to do bigger keys, you're going to see that there's a little bit more nuance to rotating your defensives and understanding the dungeon's mechanics a little better. Specifically for boss fights, this is hard for Elemental Shaman. So I highly recommend that you play with classes as an Elemental Shaman that are kind of able to babysit you a little bit more. Of course, it's always all fun and games, right? We want you guys to have fun and play with your friends. But if you're serious about pushing keys, you need to be playing with group compositions that are going to benefit you as a shaman being a squishier class. So definitely learn those mechanics and where to use those certain defensives. And my last tip for you guys is regarding your earthquakes. It is so much more important in this build, in the lightning build, to not lose damage on your earthquakes. I see this all the time, where people don't like to play with the Echoes of Great Sundering talent because they feel that the tank just kites too much and they lose a whole lot of damage on them. But you have an opportunity to play better, right? It's not just the build's problem, right? It's not the build's fault. It's unfortunate that a lot of our damage comes from a ground targeted ability, right? But we have the opportunity to mitigate that loss of damage if we play a little bit better. So the way I see it is, if you guys are playing with the tank and he needs to kite, first of all, your tank should be communicating with the team if they are out of cooldowns and they need to start kiting. That's one thing. Another thing is, if you're placing an earthquake and the tank is kiting in a specific direction, one, drop an earthbind totem, slow the mobs, right? Or drop a capacitor totem and stun them in place before you cast your earthquake. Capacitor totem has a 2-second charge up time, so that's enough time for you to get the GCD out for the capacitor totem as well as the earthquake to put it down, right? If the tank is kiting in a specific direction, let's say the shack is the direction that the tank is kiting. If I place the earthquake over here, right, these mobs are going to be walking through this earthquake in order to get to the tank's new position, right? So that's kind of like what we call leading the earthquake or leading the sniper shot on a moving target. So you have things in your toolkit to allow you to reduce the impact that kiting does on your damage kit, right? Lead the earthquakes. Don't place the earthquake where the targets are. Place the earthquake where the targets are going to be going to or moving through, okay? This will definitely, you will see an impact in your damage. I guarantee it if you apply these things and you apply these tips to it. All around, I feel that it's a really good build. I've been playing it a lot this week. Specifically in Algathar's Academy, I think it's probably one of the better builds, especially for boss damage in Tyrannical weeks. So I recommend checking it out. Get familiar with the lightning build for patch 10.1 because it's going to be really good with our new tier set. I highly recommend that you guys learn this build. If you guys are already a fan of the lightning build, fantastic. I hope you learned some stuff from this video. I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching. Subscribe for more content if you guys want to see more Shaman stuff going into 10.1 and further into Dragonflight. Support my content if you guys are generous enough. Please drop a like on the video, comment down below. Check out my Patreon page and my Twitch stream where I stream pretty much every day after 4 p.m. Right now, we're actually a little busy, my girlfriend and I. I just want to give you a quick update here. We are looking to move very quickly because unfortunately, we have to vacate the house. The house is getting sold, so we need to leave. So we're going to be busy doing that. Pretty much, we're doing showings every day for the next week and a half, trying to find a place. So that's a little update on that. Content may get a little slow while we're settling in to our new place, but yeah, if you guys want to see more stuff, definitely hit that subscribe button. Check out my other content, and until next time, keep calm and Maelstrom on.